Here we go, Chapter 14, Section 3, Big Business. Key terms and names: corporation, stockholder, stock, economies of scale, fixed costs, operating costs, pool, Andrew Carnegie, Bessemer process, vertical integration, horizontal integration, monopoly, trust, holding company. In the 1860s, the oil industry in the United States was highly competitive. One highly efficient company was Standard Oil, owned by John D. Rockefeller and his associates. Because his company shipped so much oil, Rockefeller was able to negotiate rebates or refunds from railroads that wanted his business. This gave his company an advantage, and he began to pressure other oil companies to sell out to him. Oil producer Franklin Tarbell pledged never to surrender. Tarbell's daughter, Ida, later recalled her father's indignation over Rockefeller's maneuvers. It was as if somebody had tried to crowd me off the road. There were rules. You can't use the road unless you obeyed those rules. The railroads, so said my father, ran through the valley by consent of the people, and they had given them the right of way. The road on which I trotted was a right of way. One man had the same right as any other, but the railroads had given one something that they could not give to another. The strong wrested from the railroads the privilege of preying upon the weak. Let me fix this red box here. Okay. The rise of big business. Before the Civil War, personal wealth of a few people operating in partnership financed most businesses, including many early factories. Most manufacturing enterprises were very small. By 1900, everything had changed. Big business dominated the economy, operating vast complexes of factories, warehouses, offices, and distribution facilities. Economics, the role of corporations. Big business would not have been possible without the corporation. Corporation, key term, is an organization owned by many people, but treated by law as though it was a single person. Corporation can own property, pay taxes, make contracts, and sue and be sued. The people who own the corporation are called the stockholders, key term, because they own shares of ownership called stock, key term. Issuing stock allows a corporation to raise large amounts of money for big projects while spreading out the financial risk. Before the 1830s, there were few corporations in the United States because entrepreneurs had to convince a state legislature to issue them a charter. Beginning in the 1830s, however, states began passing general incorporation laws, allowing companies to become corporations and issue stock without charters from the legislature. Economies of scale. With the money they raised from the sale of stock, corporations could invest in new technologies, hire a large workforce, and purchase many machines, greatly increasing their efficiency. This enabled them to achieve what is called economies of scale, key term, in which corporations make goods more cheaply because they produce so much so quickly using large manufacturing facilities. All businesses have two kinds of costs: fixed cost and operating or variable costs. Fixed cost, key term, are costs a company has to pay whether or not it is operating. For example, a company would have to pay its loans, its mortgages, its taxes, regardless of whether it was operating. Operating costs, key term, are costs that occur when running a company, such as paying wages, shipping charges, buying raw materials, and other supplies. These small manufacturing companies had been typical before the Civil War, usually had a very low fixed costs but very high operating costs. If sales dropped, it was cheaper to shut down and wait for better economic conditions. By comparison, big companies had very high fixed costs because it took so much money to build and maintain a factory. Compared to their fixed costs, big business had low operating costs. Wages and transportation costs were such a small part of the corporation's costs that it made sense to keep operating, even when in a recession. In these circumstances, big corporations had several advantages. They could produce more goods. They could produce goods more cheaply and efficiently. They could continue to operate in poor economic times by cutting prices to increase sales rather than shutting down. Many were also able to negotiate rebates from the railroads, thus lowering their operating costs even further. Small businesses with high operating costs found it difficult to compete against large corporations, and many were forced out of business. At the time, many people criticized corporations for cutting prices and negotiating rebates. They believed that corporations were behaving unethically by using their wealth to drive small companies out of business. In many cases, the changing nature of business organization and the new importance of fixed costs that caused competition to become so severe forced many small companies out of business. Consolidation of industry. Many corporate leaders did not like the intense competition that had been forced on them. Although falling prices benefited consumers, they cut into profits. To stop prices from falling, many companies organized pools, key term, or agreements to maintain prices at a certain level. American courts and legislatures were suspicious of pools because they interfered with competition and property rights. As a result, companies that formed pools had no legal protection and could not enforce their agreements in court. Pools generally did not last long. They broke apart whenever one member cut prices to steal the market share from another, which allowed competition to resume. By the 1870s, competition had reduced many industries to a few and highly efficient corporations. Andrew Carnegie and steel. The remarkable life of Andrew Carnegie, key name, illustrates many of the different factors that led to industrialism and the rise of big business in the United States. He was born in Scotland, the son of a poor hand weaver who immigrated to the United States in 1848. At age 12, Carnegie went to work as a bobbin boy in a textile factory, earning $1.20 per week. After 2 years, he became a messenger in a telegraph office. Then he worked as a private secretary to Thomas Scott, a superintendent and later president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Carnegie's energy impressed Scott, and when Scott was promoted, Carnegie succeeded him as superintendent. As a railroad supervisor, Carnegie knew he could make a lot of money by investing in companies that served the railroad industries. He bought shares in iron mills and factories that made sleeping cars and railroad locomotives. He also invested in a company that built railroad bridges. In his early 30s, he was earning up to $50,000 per year, and he decided to quit his job with the railroad to concentrate on his own business affairs. As part of his business activities, Carnegie frequently traveled to Europe to sell railroad bonds. On one trip, he met the English investor, Sir Henry Bessemer, who had invented a new process for making high-quality steel efficiently and cheaply. After meeting Bessemer, Carnegie decided to concentrate his investments in the steel industry. He opened a steel company in Pittsburgh in 1875 and quickly adapted the steel mills to use the Bessemer process, key term. Carnegie often boasted about how cheaply he could produce steel. He said, 2 pounds of ironstone mined upon Lake Superior and transported 900 miles to Pittsburgh. 1 pound and 1/2 of coal mined and manufactured into coke and transported to Pittsburgh 1/2 pound of lime mined and transported to Pittsburgh, a small amount of manganese ore mined in Virginia and brought to Pittsburgh, and these 4 pounds of materials manufactured into 1 pound of steel, for which the consumer pays 1 cent. Vertical and horizontal integration. To increase manufacturing efficiency even further, Carnegie took the next step in building a big business. He did this by beginning the vertical integration of the steel industry. Key term: a vertically integrated company owns all of the different businesses on which it depends on for its operation. Instead of paying companies for coal, lime, and iron, Carnegie's company bought coal mines, limestone quarries, and iron ore fields. Vertical integration saved companies money while enabling big companies to become even bigger. Successful business leaders like Carnegie also pushed for horizontal integration, or combining, that's a key term, combining many firms engaged in the same type of business into one large corporation. Horizontal integration took place frequently as companies competed. When a company began to lose its market share, it would often sell out to competitors to create a larger organization. By 1880, for example, a series of buyouts had enabled Rockefeller Standard Oil to gain control of approximately 90% of the oil refining industry in the United States. When a single company achieves control of an entire market, it becomes a monopoly. Key term. Many Americans feared monopolies because they believed that a company with a monopoly could charge whatever it wanted for its products. Others, however, supported monopolies. They believed that monopolies had to keep prices low because raising prices would encourage competitors to reappear and offer the products for a lower price. In the same industries, companies had a virtual monopoly in the United States but were competing on a global scale. Standard Oil, for example, came very close to having a monopoly in the United States. Competition with other oil companies throughout the world forced the Standard Oil Company to keep its prices low in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Trusts. By the 1800s, many Americans had grown suspicious of large corporations and feared the power of monopolies. To preserve competition and to prevent horizontal integration, many states made it illegal for one company to own stock in another without specific permission from the state legislature. In 1882, Standard Oil formed the first trust, key term, a new way of merging business that did not violate the laws against owning other companies. A trust is a legal concept that allows one person to manage another person's property. The person who manages another's property is called a trustee. Instead of buying a company outright, Standard Oil had stockholders give their stocks to a group of Standard Oil trustees. In exchange, the stockholder received shares in the trust, which entitled them to the portion of the trust's profits. Since the trustees did not own the stock but were merely managing it, they were not violating any laws. The arrangement enabled the trustees to control a group of companies as if they were one large merged company. Holding companies. Beginning in 1889, the state of New Jersey further accelerated the rise of big business with a new general incorporation law. This law allowed corporations chartered in New Jersey to own stock in other businesses without any need for special legislative action. The companies immediately used the New Jersey law to create a new organization called a holding company. Key term. A holding company does not produce anything itself. Instead, it owns the stock of companies that do produce goods. A holding company controls all the companies it owns, effectively merging them into one large enterprise. By 1904, the United States had 318 holding companies. Together, these giant corporations controlled over 5,300 factories and were worth more than $7 billion. selling the product. The vast array of products that American industries churned out led retailers to look for new ways to market and sell goods. N.W. Ayer and Son of Philadelphia, for example, developed bold new formats for advertising. Large display ads with illustrations replaced the small typed line ads that had been standard in newspapers. By 1900, retailers were spending over $90 million a year on advertising, approximately 10 times what they had spent back in 1865. Advertising attracted readers to the newest retail business, the department store. In 1877, advertisements billed John Wanamaker's new Philadelphia department store, the Grand Depot, as the largest space in the world devoted to retail selling on a single floor. When Wanamaker's opened, only a handful of department stores existed in the United States. Soon hundreds sprang up. Department stores changed the idea of shopping by bringing a huge array of different products together in one large, elegant building, creating an atmosphere that made shopping seem glamorous and exciting. Chain stores, a group of similar stores owned by the same company, first appeared in the mid-1800s. In contrast to department stores, which offered many services, chain stores focused on thrift, offering low prices instead of elaborate service and decor. Woolworths, a chain store that opened in 1879, became one of the most successful retail chains in American history. To reach millions of people who lived in rural areas in the late 1800s, far from chain stores or department stores, retailers began issuing mail order catalogs. Two of the largest mail order retailers were Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck. Their huge catalogs, widely distributed through the mail, used attractive illustrations and friendly descriptions to advertise thousands of items for sale. The end.